Hi everyone, join me today as I tell you how soil is killing us all slowly. That's right, you, me, our friends, our families, all of us, secretly, slowly. But don't worry, I've got a few tips that might help you to deal with this. Hi, I'm your man, Simonsoil. I'm going to talk to you about the soil and human health connection. Now, we've all heard that you are what you eat, and 90% of all the food, it's estimated, is actually derived either directly or indirectly from soil. And so when you kind of think about it, actually having healthy, fertile soil which can produce healthy and nutritious food is incredibly important to human health. Now, we've all observed a degeneration in terms of human health over the last 90 or 100 years or so, and this has been measurable. Recent times, our resilience against certain things that the world throws at us, diseases, viruses, are really under spotlight. But this has been going on for some time, and there's a chap I've been reading on, actually I came across him some years ago, called Weston Price, and he studied this decline in human health and looked for patterns in what factors were causing a degeneration in human health. And in his book, Nutrition and Degeneration in Health, Price travelled the world. He went on these expeditions and he studied indigenous cultures. What he found was where an indigenous culture had become solely dependent on all the locally, naturally produced food, health was actually pretty high. And one of his measures of human health was actually teeth. He was a dentist by trade, and it was kind of generally understood that dental decay or degeneration in kind of dental hygiene, problems with teeth, were actually symptomatic of wider problems with human health. And as I say, he travelled the world and he found that where there were these indigenous tribes, there were very few health problems. But actually, where a modern diet had been introduced into the community, Western foods, processed foods, actually problems started to arise. And then he actually brought this information back to the Western world, to America where he lived. Some of his studies even included more Western cultures, like in Switzerland. But the big takeaway was modern foods, less wholesome, naturally derived foods from fertile soil, were detrimental to human health. Now, fast forward 90 years and the so-called soil experts actually think that we've got anywhere between 60 and 100 harvests left. I mean, that's really worrying. Soil organic matter, which I'll talk about perhaps another time, is incredibly important within this, because a lot of those soils, a lot of the soils around us that our food's produced on, are actually incredibly low in organic matter. And this is bad because it leaves soils open to erosion, it leaves them open to poor fertility, and gives them very little resilience. They don't have the natural capability to resist whatever the world throws at it. And obviously with things like climate change, there is a lot getting thrown at soils at the moment. So if our soils are lacking, that means our foods are lacking. And whilst we can define to a large extent human health through blood tests, hair samples, scans, physical fitness, heart, whatnot, we struggle to actually define soil health to the same degree. When we talk about soil fertility, I think context is key here. Soil fertility generally relates to its ability to grow things, plants, vegetables, crops, whatnot. In humans, fertility tends to relate to reproduction, the ability to reproduce more humans. To me, it kind of makes sense, or more sense, that soil fertility referred or related to its ability to generate more soil. So insofar as soil health in relation to the food that we eat, to me, it should mean that the soil contains all the major, minor micronutrients that are so vital to human health. All those things that Price found the indigenous tribes were consuming in their local, naturally derived foods because of the fertile soil they were grown on. Now, I'd like to tell you another short story here about a chap called Charles Grigg. And in the 1920s, this guy formed what he called the Howdy Corporation. And the Howdy Corporation basically produced drinks, soft drinks to be precise. But Charles had his heart set on producing a new spectacular drink that was wholesome, fantastic word there, and would really set the taste buds on fire. And it took him something like 2 years. He went through 11 different formulations and recipe before he finally found the ideal recipe. And it was for a lithiated lemon flavoured drink, which we now know as 7-Up. The big selling point of this drink at the time was the fact that it was lithiated. It contained lithium within it, because actually a lot of the communities around there, I think it was produced in somewhere like St. Louis in Missouri, a lot of the communities were actually suffering from deficiencies in the human body of lithium. Absolutely fascinating, because up until recently, coming across this story, I'd always thought of lithium in terms of a treatment for mental illness, or in relation to soil, perhaps something less desirable and maybe would fit alongside heavy metals, which are generally considered bad things in soil. But lithium, it turns out, is an essential ingredient within the human body. It actually plays an important role within brain function, and this drink was packed full of it. Obviously the formulation changed, it doesn't have lithium in it now. The name was changed from an appalling name, I can't remember even what it was, bib label lithiated lemon lime soda was the name. Nowadays lithium is still very much under scrutiny, lithium deficiency to be precise. The main source of it tends to be from water and foods, vegetables, etc. from the soil. But it's understood that it can play an important role within mental conditions, like I've mentioned. Recently, they've even related this to Parkinson's disease. People with Parkinson's have been observed to have low levels of lithium in the body. And it's the same with other people with learning difficulties as well, can often have low levels of lithium in the body. So as I've mentioned, the main source of lithium is water and vegetables. Basically, it's found in trace quantities throughout soils. And one of the issues with this is the uneven distribution of lithium and other elements across the planet. You tend to get pockets or hot spots of slightly more elements in one area than others, and dependent on where you live, you might have a bit more or a bit less of one thing than the other. The other thing is certain elements, lithium included, can be antagonistic to other elements such as calcium and magnesium, and it tends to be, if you have more of one, you have less of another. The thing that I find incredible about this is how something that we generally associate with products like batteries, in fact, around 71% of lithium goes towards battery production. According to USGS data, last year the value was around $8,000 per tonne. How such an element can have such a big effect with its scarcity, these pockets mined all over the world, its value is only going to go up, and that means that rare earth elements are becoming increasingly sought after, lithium being one of them. As such, they're also commodity items, and people are now starting to get into the trading of them and investing in rare earth elements or other precious metals in addition to the usual gold, silver, etc. So there is an overriding message here, which is if you've got it in your soil, like lithium and other of these micro elements or micronutrients, keep it, protect it, and try and add to it, because at some point in the future they will be scarce and they will be invaluable, not just in financial terms like the mining example I've just given, but actually in terms of your human health. And boils down to, if you would rather get all the essential elements you need through naturally produced food or through supplements, and some of those supplements may actually be artificially derived sources of these elements as well. So all of this is great, rather conventional and all. I haven't even touched on the life aspect. When we consider health, whether that's human health or soil health, it tends to cast this image of life. Certainly when we think of health generally, we tend to think of people, things, animals and what. It's the same with soil. Soil health really should include the life within the soil as well. And in fact, soil life is incredibly important in terms of that human soil health connection. When I'm talking about life in soil, what I actually mean are all the microorganisms, so things like bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, arthropods, earthworms, small mammals. You could even extrapolate that up and include larger mammals as well. But I'm talking about all the things that live in, on, and around the soil. The smallest of those, the microorganisms initially mentioned, the bacteria and fungi, are incredibly important for plants or food. They populate the area around the plant root called the rhizosphere. They form interactions, very close bonds with the plant root, and in fact it's that relationship, that synergistic relationship. It's mutually beneficial. The plant gives out foods, biochemicals that those organisms can absorb and use to live, and in return those organisms help mobilize and capture and produce things from the soil, which it then hand delivers effectively to the roots of the plant, thereby making things available to the plant that it wouldn't be able to get on its own. It therefore stands to reason that the more diverse an array of these organisms that you've got, and the higher the concentrations of them that you have in the soil, the better. You can make more things available to plants. You can help the plant's natural defences. You can boost those and provide a team of little microscopic workers that kind of come in like a little army to help protect the plant. And that's because they want to help protect that relationship that they have. This ability for microbes to make things available to plants, foods and whatnot reminds me a lot of the human gut. And in fact, it's estimated that there's somewhere between 40 and 60 trillion bacteria present at any one time in the human gut. And in fact, a recent article in Science Focus even went so far as to say limited diversity of bacteria within the human gut could be responsible for certain conditions and allergies or intolerances to certain food. Thereby, it stands to reason the more diverse microbes you have in your gut, potentially, the more healthy you become, the less likely you are to have allergies, the more resistant you are to certain diseases or external factors. But where do these microbes that play such a critical role within the human body and have the ability to communicate to the brain through the vagus nerve and control our emotional states, where do they come from in the first place? Well, many are passed on through the natural process of childbirth, and that kind of gives the blueprint. But thereafter, we're consuming something like 1 million bacteria per gram of food that we eat. And where does that food come from? The soil again. Remember, 90% of everything we eat is either directly or indirectly derived from the soil. So to me, that really is the ultimate in terms of the human soil health connection. So food is obviously key to this. The soil is obviously what provides those organisms to the foods that we eat. And in fact, for comparison's sake, within the human body, it's estimated that in an adult, there's somewhere between 200 and 250 grams of bacteria. To get the same amount of bacteria out of healthy soil, you'd probably need around a third of a ton or so. That's the equivalent of around 5.5 square meters at 10 centimeters depth. So it's a hell of a lot. But I think the important point to note here is obviously the more healthy your soil, the more active and populous it is with all these different microbes, the more diverse those microbes that you can generate within your soil, so much the better, as these are passed on to the food, which then passes through the gastrointestinal tract of the human body. And over time, it's possible to condition the gut with these microbes, so enough of the same range of organisms over time starts to build up their numbers within the human body. So if there are microbial deficiencies, if you like, within the human body, it stands to reason that you could effectively recondition the human body with microbes. And this is where fermented foods and even fecal implants kind of come into play. What we're talking about there is directly inputting through as natural means as possible those organisms which are critical to gut health. Soil microbiology is a really key factor within soil health. Some might even argue and say it's the most important factor. Me personally, I think everything within balance. However, remember at the start I said soil is killing us off. Well, it's being mined and extracted of all of these essential elements to the human body and for us to function correctly. It's being robbed of the ingredients that help these microorganisms work as they should and be present in huge numbers and in diverse kind of communities that our very insides are reliant on. And over time, this lack of nutrition and health in the food that's being produced on these declining soils are not just not feeding us properly, not giving us the sustenance that we need, but the artificial means to work around some of these deficiencies or dysfunctions within soil are starting to play with our system and kill us off. And it's a gradual process of decline, admittedly, in human health. Other things are happening quite quickly, but you can begin to understand how the health of soil and its decline in the last century have played a pivotal role in how the human species has fared and how our own health is declining almost in unison with it. So all of this is fantastic and everything, and understanding that soil health is leading to an unbalance and depleting the human biome, and it's all very depressing. But what can we do about it? Well, for me, there are three important takeaways. So the first on my list is grow your own. Now, chances are, if you're watching this, you are already producing your own food. When I say grow your own, I mean generate your own food. 90% of what we eat tends to come from the soil at some point. So that could be growing fruit, vegetables, salad items. It could be livestock like chickens or other animals that are grass-fed. But the idea is to be in control of your own food. Now, if you already do this, try and scale up your production. Probably everyone wishes they could. Time is obviously a factor within this, but there are processes and things that you can do and understand that would help make that process easier and less time consuming and less financially demanding. If you don't grow anything, start growing stuff. If you don't have the space, that could be pots or window boxes. Just start small, and whatever you choose to grow, generally a good rule of thumb is the greener the better, and that tends to be because many of those micronutrients that we're lacking are contained in some of those greener items of produce. Number 2 on my list is test your soil. I cannot emphasize this enough. I spend most of my working week telling people test your soil. And the reason is very simple. If you can measure it, you can manage it. If you don't know, you can't do anything about it. So just a simple soil test, doesn't have to be anything complex, isn't even that particularly costly. So a well-collected sample sent to a good laboratory can provide a whole host of vital information, really basic stuff like pH, levels of organic matter, that can instantly affect how and what you do with your current area of land. Things like that can improve productivity, it can improve the nutritional content of your food. So really I should have put that as number 1, test your soil. Number 3, my final tip is slightly controversial, but test yourself. Be the guinea pig. Now that could range from looking into your family history, perhaps go a little bit further back than your immediate family and find out what your ancestors suffered with or perhaps even died of. Or it could be a complete kind of body check and looking to see about getting a blood test or other tests done to screen for particular elements in your blood and seeing what you may or may not be deficient in. You might want to include your tap water within that. I know where I live, it's incredibly hard water. We suffer from huge calcium buildup, and as a consequence our magnesium levels are particularly low. And that means even with the food that we grow, it can be incredibly difficult to get the the amount of magnesium that we need, and at that point you might want to consider supplements. I'm no nutritional expert on this, but the water that we drink, whether that's cups of tea, bottled water, we are conditioning our body. A little bit like I mentioned with the gut biome, we are conditioning ourselves over time. This has a big impact. So test ourselves, test what goes on around us. Also, the manner in which we test is incredibly important as well. Not everything has to be carried out with a nasty needle. We're probably all fed up of those at the moment anyway, quite frankly, but there are other tests that can be done. The lithium deficiency I talked about earlier on, actually you could test in a hair tissue mineral analysis for that. The reason we might test different bits of the body is it's a little bit like soil. We can measure that something is there, the presence of or the concentration of these things, but actually it doesn't necessarily mean they're even absorbed. So look at yourself, look at your wider family, maybe consider what tests you might want to run. You might even just want to move over to trialing certain foods or removing certain foods as well. But consider using yourself as a bit of a guinea pig to test and find out what's the best way forward for you. So there we go, everyone. That wraps things up. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. Now, I'd love it if you would leave me a comment or ask your questions in the comment section below. That would be great. And it'd be amazing if you considered following me so that you can see when I put out more videos like this in the future. See you soon.